Good evening. Welcome to Africa's Vision Network. My name is Omar Ashaka. The title of our program this evening is called The Opinion. I'm going to define the word opinion based on what was in the dictionary recently when I did my little research. Opinion, a belief that is not based on what is certain, but on what one thinks to be true or likely, which suggests to me we first must use the brain power that we all have in order to come up with an opinion. And that's what this evening's show is going to be about, an opinion on many different topics. My first guest is Mr. Raymond Thompson. Raymond is from Lexington, Kentucky, a very astute, very informed gentleman. He was on our program the last time we did the Opinion Show, and I'm looking forward to chatting with him today. Matter of fact, Raymond, thank you very much for being available.
Thank you, Omar.
I do want to add our second guest, Mr. Timothy States, is not going to be available because he had a last-minute crisis, and it's really related to the financial crisis that's going on with Wall Street. Raymond, it's good to have you here. The last time we had the show, we talked about a lot of different topics. We talked about Don Imus,
right,
which was rather interesting. We talked about the subprime loans, another very interesting topic, in particular when we look at the financial crisis.
Right.
We also talked about Democratic candidates, Senator Hillary Clinton and Senator Barack Obama. Some of these things I want to touch on this evening. But the first question I want to ask you, though, Raymond, we talked also, I think we may have talked a little bit about Michael Vick.
Yes, we did.
And I thought I would not so soon be talking about another sad story, and that's the former mayor, Kwame Kilpatrick. What are your thoughts about him?
Well, personally, I think that what we see is a real person. I think so often when it comes down to political office, we oftentimes elect people who are very charismatic. Sometimes there may not be background or substance there. We've seen people who, in some cases, have been very effective, who've been former athletes, wrestlers, Jesse Ventura in Minnesota. You also have had a governor in California who's proven to be just as effective as the previous one, who was a former bodybuilder. So sometimes we look at a person who's good at projecting themselves. What we see as an image may not be who the person really is. Who you really are comes out eventually over a period of time.
Well, that's interesting. Real quick, when I look at the common denominator with Michael Vick and Kwame Kilpatrick, both of them were very young. I think Kwame Kilpatrick's something like mid-30s. I mean, his mother's a congresswoman. And I guess, Raymond, sometimes I just wonder, why do our young men who have been successful, why is it that they can't avoid some of the traps that are out there? We had Mary Barry's, the situation with him. So most mayors know what happened with him. So I guess, real quick, what would your quick answer be as to the question, could this have been avoided?
Potentially it could have. I think that without knowing much about his background, you can raise a child a certain way and they can part from that. Our society, they teach us to win at all costs. Sometimes that may be for an athlete using a certain type of performance-enhancing substance, or for someone who doesn't have a lot of to offer, maybe even just lying about your abilities or presenting an image that is not quite you.
But that's interesting, and I'm going to move on, but I have to add this. I know at my church we talk about straight talk, in particular with the men. Because what I always wonder, whether it's Marion Barry, whether it's Kwame Kilpatrick, what about the men that he's surrounded by? They have to have some clue. For example, he had this, I guess, extramarital affair. Do you think the men who are around him have no clue that he's involved, or are they just keeping their mouth shut and whatever happens, happen? What are your thoughts? Because I think sometimes we just, as men, we know things are happening with our fellow men, if you will, but we keep our mouth shut?
I think we have a tendency sometimes to stay out of other people's business, but oftentimes if you really care about someone, you say the hard things. They may dislike what you're saying, but in the long term, they look back at that and they know you were right. You remember Mike Tyson. When Mike Tyson, as a young boxer, he was adopted by a gentleman who taught him a lot. He mentored him. Now, this gentleman died at a early age in Mike's career, but Mike would always talk back about him and the things he had taught him when he found himself in trouble. He said, "Cause always told me this would happen at some point in time." So sometimes you put information out there, people may resent it, but as they experience life, they can look back on your words. And we've all experienced that as we've grown older. Things that people taught us come back to us.
And that's an interesting point, and I guess we could talk about this situation probably throughout the show, but that's an interesting point when you talked about this gentleman who mentored Mike and gave him wisdom and gave him guidance, because I got a feeling the common denominator that was missing with Marion Barry, his father wasn't there. I don't know about Kwame Kilpatrick, but I have not heard anybody talk about his father, and I can go on and on. But let me talk about another quick point, Raymond, that we talked about on some of the other shows here. We talked about gun violence. And there was a very sad event that took place in Prince George's County maybe a month ago, where this 5-month-old baby boy was killed. I think they were shooting at the father. He was in the car, killed the 5-month-old baby and in Prince George's County, Maryland. But there was no public outrage. Right quick, in your opinion, even though I've been encouraged, our producer, the fabulous Gloria Fleming, indicated that the NAACP talked about gun violence, because sometimes I'm tough on NAACP. And I know they talk about it a lot, but a lot of times there's no follow-up. But in your opinion, Raymond, why in your opinion that there's no outrage when a 5-month-old baby boy is killed by a gun?
That is a hard question, and I really don't have an answer. You know, we get outraged over a situation like Imus, but at the same time, we can have hundreds of black men die within 2 cities, Baltimore, Washington, per year, and you don't see the same degree of outrage. So that's something we really have to soul search on, and once we reach a certain tolerance level, I guess it will come out, but I really don't have an answer for that. It's something I've wondered about.
Well, you know, I appreciate the candor there. You said you don't have an answer, but you talked about tolerance level. I have to say, and I have to put it this way, my God, how much more tolerance can we have when a 5-month-old baby boy is shot down like that?
You're right.
Yeah. But you talked about Amos. Let me lead into Reverend Jesse Jackson's comment about Senator Barack Obama. And I don't have the quote here, but that was very disturbing. And I have a lot of respect for Jesse Jackson. I've talked about him when he's done some things wrong, but I always say that he's done some good things because, I mean, I've marched with him, and he's done some good things. But lately he's been doing a lot of things I've defined as being rather boyish. When he was sitting on that TV, in that TV studio, almost looking like a minstrel character, in my opinion, because he was kind of whispering, and he didn't have enough awareness that the mic was still on. And I thought he talked about something like he could cut off Senator Barack Obama's scrolums.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
How do you explain that? And going back to Imus, we protested on what he said, but we were rather quiet, I think, collectively, even though his son kind of approached him about it.
I tell you with that, I look at his record. He's made a lot of significant contributions. Mr. Obama wouldn't be where he's at today without those before him having made those sacrifices. I think we all make really dumb statements sometimes that we wish hadn't come out in the open, and it's we have to forgive and forget. It's kind of disappointing because certain people we hold up to a high level, we find out that they're human. So that's why it really disappoints us when it comes from a certain, person,
Well, Raymond, I'm smiling because I appreciate you reminding me, because I do try to be a Christian, and I appreciate you reminding me that we have to forgive. I just think it's a little sad because had Imus said that, or had anybody else said that, Pat Buchanan, it would have been a different ballgame.
Right.
But let's talk about Senator Obama and Senator John McCain. What were your thoughts about the debate?
I
the
thought
presidential debate?
yes, I thought Senator Obama held himself well. There was a lot of concern as to how he would do in the debate, whether he would crumble and be intimidated somewhat. I thought he was in command of the facts. He put a lot of solid information out there, and I think his message for this time resonates with a lot of the public. Even those who wouldn't support him for other reasons look at the economic situation and the plight of the middle class in this country. And so I think that it's a perfect storm where he's coming along right at a time when folks throw on the life preserver. You're not too particular at that point in time when you're drowning about who you got to take the life preserver from.
Interesting point, because that leads right into my next question. And my question, Raymond, was when you were watching the debate, did you see black and white? Or is it because you said somebody's going to be throwing that life preserver, so you don't care whether they're black or white, they're going to save your life? But did you see black and white?
No, and I never have, because I've often found my situation, and like many folks do, where you're in environments, work environments, where there aren't many people around like you sometimes. And so you get used to that and you don't think about it. Whereas I think when you're the majority, and I've had friends and coworkers who told me they felt uncomfortable in certain situations. So for me, I don't see black and white. I've dealt with for so long. But you're talking about a shift in power potentially, or at least perceived power, to where without knowing why, without thinking it out, sometimes people resist change for that reason. They think it's going to be a bad thing for them. And we live in a country that has had centuries of teaching of racial superiority. And so we come to this pivotal point, and when it comes time to, cast that ballot, folks may decide to, go the other way at the last minute.
Raymond, give me a couple odd things that you noticed during the debate, if any at all.
Well, I noticed it might be just his style, but Mr. McCain, he never looked at Mr. Obama, who he was debating. He always stared straight ahead. That could just be just his style,
But I have to ask you, you think in your heart and your mind, you really think it was just his style? Is there something else that might be in your mind that you might explain why he did that, but maybe you didn't bring it out?
He comes from power, and he may not appreciate being in that situation. He felt agitated, and sometimes I know myself, when I get a little bit annoyed, I get some of those same mannerisms, Mr. Obama was in command of the facts. He had him stuttering a few times. Mm-hmm. So I think he may have found himself in a very uncomfortable situation and a very annoying situation. So your mannerisms kind of reflect that, perhaps.
It's interesting because I am going somewhere with this question, and I'm going to try to define John McCain, but I want to make sure at the same time I'm not defining Raymond.
Okay.
Because when you mention annoyed, you get annoyed sometimes. Can you kind of expound on that a little bit?
Well,
because that's kind of tied to a point I want to make, but I wanted to see what makes you annoyed.
Maybe find myself in uncomfortable situations that you can't cope with at the time. Okay. And then trying to contain yourself where you don't say anything. When you get older, you learn if you don't have something positive to say, don't say anything.
Okay.
So sometimes it comes out in your mannerisms.
Okay.
And
I'm glad you explained it, because your position is a little different than what I'm going to try to put on Senator McCain. But before I go into that, give me one quick word, in your opinion, that would define the vice presidential nominee, Sarah Palin, Governor Sarah Palin. One word.
Challenged.
Okay. All right. And the word that I would use is beware. But let me go back to Senator McCain. It's rather interesting. I got an email last night, and I was looking at it, and God is always on time. But this email talked about, to my surprise, how Senator McCain up on Capitol Hill, he has been a proponent. He's always tried to block information from being released about the Vietnam veterans. And when I read that, I was really shocked. And I'll try to summarize this real quick, but bottom line, there have been POW families, prisoners of war families, who have tried to get more information from the U.S. government. John McCain, from what I read in this email, has been a hard-nosed person and not wanting to release information. And I found that really amazing. But as I continued to read this article, I also found out that Senator McCain, when he was tortured, he confessed certain information. He gave up certain information. And from what I understand, he never really got over that because you talked about power, and you were right on time about that, because his father at the time he was a POW was an admiral in charge of, I think, all the operations in the Pacific. And his grandfather was a major officer, and his great-uncle was a major officer. I don't know if that ties into his book that he wrote called Faith of My Fathers. But one of the challenges that Senator McCain had was he didn't know whether his father knew that he had given up, so to speak, and just kind of gave out information. Where I'm going with this, Raymond, is, and this article kind of suggested it, there are some who think that Senator John McCain is presently faced with post-stress syndrome disorder.
Traumatic stress syndrome.
Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder. What is it, PTSD, I believe.
Right.
And when you talked about how he didn't look at Senator Obama, when I was reading this article, one of the things they talked about when people have PTSD is that they avoid people. They avoid places because it brings back the reoccurrence of a particular event. And here's something I was thinking last night, Raymond, and this may sound a little bizarre, but that's what an opinion is all about, thinking.
Right.
And it's my opinion. I wonder if Senator John McCain had a problem in looking at Senator Obama, because I think if we go back to a lot of debates, and I've seen a few, I've never seen a candidate not look at another candidate. Even the moderator tried to motivate him to look at Senator Obama, but he never did. I wonder if he was feeling stressed. I wonder if he was having a reoccurrence to some degree of what he went through with this torture. And the reason I say that, even when he said Senator Obama doesn't understand, there was something in his body language. And this is going to sound kind of odd, but here's another piece that I'm going to add to this. I'm assuming that most of the Vietnamese people who were torturing him were people of color. And I really wonder if part of his PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, came out during that debate. Why would a very polished senator not at a minimum give Senator Obama the respect to look at him?
You bring out a very good point. I hadn't considered that. Someone who went through what he went through in those camps, that's something that is a part of him he'll never be able to forget. And the burden he put upon himself as far as revealing information, of course, most damage is, once it's done, if they change codes, everything else, so there's really no damage after someone's gone down. They know information's going to be compromised. But he reached a breaking point. And I'm quite sure that that is a part of his life every day, every time he's in those stressful situations. And now that you bring it up, I think it probably could have been a factor in his way he presented himself. I've seen him in the primaries earlier when he went against Mr. Romney, and he was a little more animated. Mm-hmm. In fact, somewhat playing the dozens even and mm-hmm. such, against him. And so this was different. Perhaps now it's more critical, or he feels it's more so. But
well, and that's interesting when you said perhaps it's more critical, because it is more critical if he's trying to be elected president. But yet, if you and I notice this oddness of him not looking at Senator Obama, I mean, most of the American people had to notice that, and even the moderator to have to push a grown man to look at someone. I don't know what the doctors are saying, people, the health professionals are saying, but here's another thing. In this email, they talked about how there was a POD family that went to visit Senator John McCain. I guess it was a committee that he was on. And he has a reputation of lashing out at people, of losing his temper. And from what I read about this PTSD, those are some factors. But even before I read about this post-traumatic stress disorder, as I watched him not looking at Senator Obama, I said, something is not right about this gentleman. They talked about divorce. Now, many of us have been divorced. So I can't pinpoint that on him, but they did state that that's an indication too sometimes that people who are faced with that disorder, they get a divorce. We know his
puts a lot of stress on a relationship.
Right.
I kind of think too, some of the human type of events he's had take place in his life and the unfortunate capture and time in the camp, it should make a person more rounded as a human being and also as a commander-in-chief. You would think that someone who's been through those type situations would be the last people to call for war. But oftentimes it's a little bit different for a person who might be an aviator perhaps than a ground troop who may deal firsthand with the results of his actions and see it up close, perhaps. I'm not sure, I'm not qualified to make that statement, but it's something where you may have a different slant on warfare if you fly over a hidden objective and head back to the ship or to the land field that you land at, as opposed to a guy who's involved in direct conflict and such.
And that's an interesting point. But I wonder, Raymond, once again, like with all of us, if you have some issues in your mind about other things, because I think not only did he have to go through the torture in being a POW, but from what I gathered, I know that there are a lot of men, they have this issue with their father because they feel like they don't meet the approval of their father.
Right.
And he talked about, in his book, Faith of My Fathers, I haven't read the book, but according to this reference, he talked about he always wondered whether or not his father knew that he had opened up so freely. And look, if we're tortured, it's very understandable why somebody would open up. But if you have a military father, you have a military grandfather, you have a military great uncle, he may feel in his mind that he was not supposed to open up. He was supposed to withstand that torture at all costs. And so I wonder if he was dealing with some failure. And I'll give you another example to try to make this clear. I see him, I'll use an analogy of a bully or of a young man that I saw on this TV show. He was a very frail young man in high school, and everybody used to beat him up. When he got older, what did he do? He went to the gym and worked out, bulked up.
Right.
And this was many years after high school. But one of the things he wanted to do after bulking up and getting all these muscles, payback. So this show, they went and found one of the bullies in his school. And this had been several years. But what did this guy want to do after he bulked up? He wanted to beat that bully who had picked on him many years ago. So you talk about going to war. I mean, just like when Senator McCain said he would fire Mr. Cox because of the crisis, just like that. So when he's so snappy, and I don't know, like I said, I don't know. This is just my opinion. I don't know what the professionals are saying, but here's my concern. If by chance he is faced with this disorder, he definitely is not the right man for our country.
I agree with you, and I tell you something which has not come up in these debates. It's the possibility of us having to reinstate the draft in this country. We don't have enough in the way of manpower to meet the objectives and such that we have now as far as the Middle East without sending the same people back a third, fourth time even, and then pulling even from older age groups. I ran into one of my former classmates in Kentucky who is my age. I'm 53, and he had been back a second time. He is a reservist and got called in and was going back again. But if we do decide to continue with this approach of not negotiating with countries and using force as a way of making people meet our mandates, then there's a strong possibility that the draft will have to be brought back in. That's something that's not coming up now because it would frighten a lot more people away from Mr. McCain as their choice for president. But you can bet you can add it up, you can see it coming. You know, if you talk about trying to force Iran to give up their nuclear ambitions, establishing a stronger foothold throughout areas of Pakistan, now with new regime in power and such, that's basically kind of impaired some of our operations there, you're going to have more manpower.
Yeah, and I think, Raymond, because time is really pretty much running out, I was going to ask you real quick, do you think Senator Obama will ask Condoleezza Rice to play a role in his administration in the event he is the next president of the United States of America? And can you make that real quick?
I think she's qualified, and I think that if need to, I think he would do it.
Okay.
I think so.
Well, Raymond, time is just, it just went away. But look, I want to thank you very much for coming on the show. And I just hope that this is, I mean, I've been watching the news programs, whether CNN, Chris Matthews, Inside Washington. The discussion on this presidential debate has just been awesome to watch. It's awesome for America. Do you think, real quick, this is turning the corner in terms of race relations in America? Real quick.
It is, and age is doing that. Young people today don't have the same hang-up and problems our generations had.
Okay. Does that hold true for the young African Americans?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Raymond, for coming, and I want to thank our viewers. And I want to close the show by saying, please go out and vote. This is a very historic election. Thank you very much for watching Africa's Vision Network, and we hope you will watch us in the future. And God bless you.